legislation's on the desk of a do-right congressman. Nah, he don't know much about the issue, so he picks up the phone and he asks advice of the senator.
The fight for rights and recognition is a defining struggle in American history. The Red Power movement, lasting from the 50s to the 80s, exemplifies this as a turning point for Native activism and made the American government acknowledge its responsibilities towards the Native people and their rights. The unearthing and acceptance of the difficult past of Native Americans made the Red Power movement an important part of the larger civil rights movement. The Red Power movement of the 20th century advocated for Native rights and forced the government to reconsider their responsibilities through protest, campaigning for recognition of broken treaties, and passing legislation that redefined Native rights. The Red Power movement occurred during the Civil Rights Movement. Aside from Native Americans, African Americans, women, and other oppressed groups used protests to plant the seeds of change. This unprecedented change was allowed due to the new advances in globalization and technology. Those changes in turn led to increased global communications. A widespread news and information network allowed for issues of the past to resurface and change the present.
Beginning with the arrival of Europeans into the New World, Native Americans have endured hardships. Early on, large portions of the native population died as a result of disease brought by settlers. With the expansion of the United States, natives were displaced from their tribal lands into reservations through acts such as the Native Removal Act. Andrew Jackson's Trail of Tears ensured that this process left a lasting scar on the native population. After being forced into reservations, life for Native Americans continued to go downhill. Tribes themselves lost treaty-making powers and slowly lost the ability to govern themselves. In 1887, the Dawes Act sought for Native assimilation into the United States by breaking up tribal land. Further assimilation was brought through schools which forced white culture on the Native children. In modern times leading up to the Civil Rights Movement, Natives continued to be mistreated. Poverty, abuse of alcohol, and assault are uncommonly high in reservations. These modern problems can be seen as a result of historical issues. While these events were the primary causes of the Red Power movement, the spark that lit the fire was the Civil Rights Movement. The Red Power movement was only able to fuel its flames through sacrifice.
I think that the general public is aware to the fact that treaties have been broken, and there's been a lot of broken promises and lies from the United States government to Indian tribes. And I believe that this jury is like a one-year-old baby. But at the end of the trial, it will be thinking like an Indian.
I think the American public will be thinking like an Indian.
I certainly hope so.
The Red Power movement saw the rise of many groups and individuals. The primary organization driving the movement was the American Indian Movement, also known as AIM. Inspired by the Black Power movement, groups such as AIM rose to confront the government about various injustices affecting natives and minorities and pressure the government into taking accountability. AIM's contributions can be defined by its series of protests, occupations, marches, and other actions to strengthen the rights of Native Americans. One of the most crucial of these moments was AIM's occupation of Alcatraz. Originally native land, Alcatraz held value to protesters. They sought to send a message to the government by reclaiming their land. While the occupation of Alcatraz was mostly peaceful, AIM's occupation of Wounded Knee was more hazardous. Wounded Knee was a site of major massacre of Native Americans. By occupying this powerful place, protesters hoped to further spread their ideology. The result was a 71-day occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota. The government got involved and AIM was forced out, but only after the deaths of 2 Native Americans. While AIM ultimately lost occupation of Wounded Knee, this event brought the Red Power movement into the eyes of the media. However, the movement still had many difficulties ahead.
Following the stabbing of a Native man, members of the Red Power movement set up an occupation of the Pine Ridge Reservation. FBI members got involved and an armed conflict ensued. Ultimately, Leonard Peltier was arrested for killing 2 FBI agents, causing global unrest among activists.
Nick O'Hara worked for the FBI at the time of the murders and was later the agent in charge of the Minnesota Division, which includes the Dakotas, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Perry.
Why, after so many years, is this case still significant enough that the FBI is releasing statements about it?
think if you don't look at the total scenario of what police officers' responsibilities are, FBI agents, ATF, DEA agents, that if somebody doesn't remember the sacrifice made by those individuals doing their job protecting the citizens, and the concern about releasing an individual who has never accepted responsibility, who has told many different stories about it, I think the system is forgiving to a point, but when the person who is guilty of these heinous crimes does not accept any responsibility, shows no remorse, I think it's a mistake to put that person back out into society.
As made evident, there were many in the government who saw the Red Power movement as a threat to society. Those people continue to exist today. One of the final major acts of the Red Power movement is largely considered the longest walk. In this protest, natives and their supporters marched from the West Coast to Washington, D.C. The goal of this protest was to strike down legislation that threatened Native rights. In many cases, the government was a negative force against the Red Power movement. Despite legislation being passed, Native Americans felt little confidence in their government leaders.
So do you think it's a waste of time for most American Indians to vote? Do you think that a vote is basically conceding the white man's way?
Well, I think it is. I think it's a violation of our sovereignty to get involved in another election. I think we're selling out. That's my own personal thoughts and my own personal feelings about it. I personally think it's a waste of time, that we have to exercise our rights, and maybe we have to go to court to do that. But we have sovereign rights, we have treaty rights, we have to stand on them and quit depending on, the Ronald Reagans and the George Bushes and people like that to change things. That's not going to happen.
Do you think that most American Indians in Minnesota agree with you?
I think probably the majority of them could care less who got in, because they have seen it from both sides.
There were also strong individuals who fought for their rights outside of large movements. Buffy St. Marie was a prominent activist and songwriter in the height of the Red Power movement. Her songs Universal Soldier, Now That the Buffalo's Gone, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and My Country 'Tis of Thee all depicted the impact that the Americans had on the natives. Even after the Red Power movement, St. Marie continued her efforts to help the natives with her Cradle Board teaching project. This personally funded project by St. Marie continues to help today with a curriculum that encourages and teaches self-identity and introduces them to important information about Native people and their different cultures.
The Red Power movement caused both short and long-term impacts on the rights and responsibilities of Native Americans. Awareness was brought to Native rights at an unprecedented level. With the rise of mass media, this was made possible. However, the media was only able to pick up on the struggles of Native Americans due to the efforts of the Red Power movement. Native rights were changed through a series of legislation such as the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was a cumulative result of multiple movements and resulted in discrimination being outlawed in the workplace. The primary accomplishment of the Red Power movement was the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. This act accomplished one of the major goals of the Red Power movement, self-determination. This meant that tribes were federally recognized and were able to form treaties and contracts to get assistance. The rights of Native Americans were not the only things put into consideration. With the sovereignty of tribes came the question of government responsibility. The government was forced to take a stance on how it handled these sovereign entities. Government responsibilities were also changed towards minorities. The government was forced through protests to take responsibility towards groups that had previously outcast in society.
The Red Power movement was a step forward in the fight for Native rights, but the struggle continues on. Today, Native Americans continue to advocate for education, funding, and the correction of certain offensive stereotypes. Our nation was built on actions that constantly limited and held back the Native Americans. Although many of AIM's goals were accomplished and fulfilled, there are still many other goals that are being worked towards, such as to allow for full equality, unification, and recognition to help establish a better link between the two societies. It is important to consider that while the Red Power movement did help gain support for Native Americans, compared to other groups involved in the Civil Rights movement, they did not have the same success. Recognizing and continuing the fight for equality and justice is a shared responsibility, not just for the government, but for everyone.